What happens when silence answers disrespect? In a quiet town, a group of restless teenagers slipped into the veteran cemetery under cover of night and left it scarred. Paint across names, flags broken, honor defaced. By morning, anger and shame rippled through neighbors. But before outrage could take hold, one lone Marine walked in alone. No speeches, no cameras, just his hands, tools, and an unbroken code. Take care of your own. What followed turned a careless act into a reckoning, and a community's memory woke up. Would you know how to answer disrespect when no one else is watching? The first light of day does not arrive here with color or ceremony. It comes as a faint silver wash across the frost, slipping between the low hills and settling on the veteran cemetery like breath on cold glass. The town still sleeps beyond the ridge, its windows dark, chimneys quiet. But inside the iron fence, the rows of headstones stand ready, lined with a soldier's precision that time cannot bend. Granite and marble, some white as chalk, others weathered to grey, lean slightly from years of winter heave. Each carries a name, a pair of dates, a war carved in block letters. The frost holds everything in a fragile stillness. It has crept up from the damp soil overnight and now glitters on every blade of grass, a thin crust that crunches underfoot when the caretaker moves. He is an old man named Harold Klein, though the town mostly calls him Hank. His breath clouds before him as he pushes a battered wheelbarrow filled with clippers, rags, and a coffee thermos the color of dull brass. Each morning he walks the same path, main gate to flagpole, flagpole to the western wall, then back through the central rows. His boots know where the ground dips and where tree roots have lifted the sod. A crow breaks the silence first. It perches on a cedar near the entrance and lets out one sharp call, black wings twitching. Another answers somewhere deeper in the cemetery. Hank glances up, but only briefly. He has learned not to break his rhythm for small things. Winter mornings are short, and there is work to finish before the frost gives way to mud. He kneels by a marker half hidden under last night's fallen needles and brushes them aside with a gloved hand. The letters appear. Corporal James L. Ryder, Vietnam. Hank rubs a spot clean with his rag, takes a slow sip of coffee, and stands again. Most of the flags are long past their bright days. Memorial Day placed them here months ago, crisp and proud, but wind and rain have bent the sticks and frayed the edges. Some are nothing more than faded stripes and faint stars. Hank collects the worst of them, sliding each into his barrow, careful not to let them touch the ground. Later he will bring replacements from the shed by the road. The quiet ritual matters to him, even if no one else sees it done. Beyond the fence, the world is only just stirring. A delivery truck hums faintly on the far road. A single farmhouse window glows yellow. The air smells of damp leaves and distant wood smoke. Here among the graves, there is only the sound of Hank's boots and the soft rasp of his breath. He pauses often, not from fatigue but from something slower, heavier, a habit of respect built over years. Each stone is greeted, if not aloud, then with a nod, a half-thought memory of the man or woman beneath. Near the center of the cemetery stands the grave of Sergeant Daniel Reeves. His headstone is newer than most, pale marble without moss or cracks, the engraved eagle still sharp. A small photo in a weatherproof sleeve leans at the base. A young man in desert camouflage, sun in his eyes, one arm thrown around a buddy. Beside it lies a bronze star medal replica, dulled from exposure. Hank's eyes catch on the grave, as they always do. Reeves came home in a flag-draped coffin not long ago. The funeral had filled this quiet place with hundreds, a sea of dress blues and salutes against the winter wind. Hank doesn't linger now. He will check the stone later, maybe brush off the frost. The dawn thickens slowly, cold light rising until shadows sharpen. Hank finishes his circuit and leans on the wheelbarrow for a moment, surveying the neat lines, the flags waiting for spring. There is no one else here, just the crows, now restless and circling above the cedar and the soft creak of the gate in the distance. He doesn't see the footprints near the far fence, half moons in the frozen grass, fresh but hidden by shadow. He doesn't know what happened here in the dark hours before morning, when laughter and spray paint cut across the stillness. That knowledge will come soon enough. For now, the cemetery is only what it has always been at daybreak, a place of waiting and watchfulness, where names sleep beneath frost, and the living keep their quiet promises. By the time the sun finally clears the ridge, thin gold light has reached the rows nearest the entrance. It spreads cautiously across the frost, melting patches into dark, wet grass. The stones reveal themselves in clearer detail now. From a distance, they look nearly uniform, white and grey slabs at soldier-straight attention, but up close each is particular. Some hold simple government-issue engravings, rank, branch, dates, a cross or star. Others bear carved phrases added by families, beloved son, always faithful, gone too soon. Coins left by fellow service members gleam on a few markers, frozen into place by the night's cold. Faded silk flowers droop under ice crystals. Plastic wreaths lean against bases. Sergeant Daniel Reeves's grave sits a little apart, not by design, but because the plot was one of the few still open when he was brought home. His headstone catches light early, its polished marble reflecting pale sky. Beneath his name and dates, 1987 to 2012, are two words chosen by his mother, Semper Fidelis. A bronze Marine Corps emblem is set deep enough that no weather has yet softened its lines. A child's drawing, laminated and taped, flaps gently against the stone. A stick figure in camouflage, smiling beside a tall flag. It's been there since Veterans Day, when the third graders came on a field trip. Hank, the caretaker, always straightens it when wind pulls at the tape. This morning he stops at Reeves's plot and crouches, coffee cup balanced on the damp ground. He runs a glove across the surface, clearing a light frost bloom. His reflection comes back faintly in the marble, lined face, wool cap pulled low. He doesn't talk out loud. He never has, but his thoughts settle here easily. Reeves had been part of the first wave of local kids after 9/11 to sign up. Hank remembers seeing him once, years ago, striding across the gas station lot in his dress blues, lean, grinning, boots polished enough to catch sun. Later news of an IED outside Sangin came back instead. The funeral had drawn an honor guard, bagpipes, Marines in their immaculate scarlet-striped trousers. Hank had stood near the fence that day, hat off, heart thudding with a quiet, inexplicable grief for a man he barely knew. He moves along the line, checking other stones, but keeps circling back with his eyes to Reeves's grave. There is a pride the town holds for its fallen, though it is mostly silent now. Memorial Day is busy. The rest of the year is not. Families come less often as seasons pass. Some graves haven't felt a visitor's hand in months. Beyond the fence, a light truck engine coughs and fades. A paperboy pedals by, tossing a folded gazette into dew. Hank doesn't look up. He notices instead a dark smudge at the base of Reeves's marker, a faint streak across the marble that his cloth can't clear. He squints, frowns, rubs harder, but the mark doesn't lift. Maybe soot from candles, he thinks, or oil from boots. When he finally steps back, something uneasy tugs at him. The air seems a little heavier than when he arrived, the quiet sharper. He glances toward the far fence again, but sees nothing unusual, just cedar shadows and pale grass. He makes a note in his head to return with stronger, cleaner after breakfast. The sun climbs higher, burning away frost and breath cloud. Hank wheels his barrow toward the shed, flags rattling in the breeze. Behind him the rows stand silent, resolute. But one stone, the new one, the one with the eagle and the taped child's drawing, now carries the faintest trace of something foreign, like a whisper of trouble before a storm. The cemetery at night is a different country. Its order and dignity blur once darkness settles and the wind moves unchecked through the cedars. The small town that sleeps beyond the ridge assumes the graves sleep too. But on this night, quiet is broken by the hum of 4 sneakers scuffing across the back road and the shaky laughter of teenagers daring one another deeper into the cold. They come just before midnight. No headlights. Phones clutched low with flashlight apps instead of beams that could be seen from the road. Their breath smokes in the frigid air. Evan, the tallest and loudest, swings a backpack full of paint cans like a trophy. Behind him trail Lucas, Ryan, and Milo, each younger by a year, and riding the thin edge between bravado and unease. They aren't here with malice that's fully formed. It's the restless dare of winter break, too many nights with nowhere to go. But intent doesn't excuse what follows. They slip through a gap in the old wire fence, where the cedar hides broken posts. Inside, the stillness is immediate, heavy. Even the boys feel it for a heartbeat. Rows of pale markers glow faintly under a quarter moon. A flag stirs. Lucas stops first. Feels weird, he mutters. Ryan elbows him, nervous grin. It's just rocks, man. Evan doesn't pause. Move it. Don't be babies. The first hiss of paint seems too loud. Evan shakes the can, ball rattling inside, and sprays a looping mark across an anonymous stone. Bright red slashing clean granite. A shock of color in the grayscale world. The others flinch but then snicker, relief spilling as sound. Ryan tries next, spraying a crooked smiley face. Lucas laughs in spite of himself, the unease turning to adrenaline. Soon they're moving fast, tagging a half-dozen stones, boots crushing frost. Beer cans appear from the backpack, cracked and fizzing in the cold. The boys drink fast, trying to stay warm and fearless, but courage this thin phrase quickly. A sudden gust rattles the cedars. Something knocks against a flagpole. Milo yelps, earning jeers, but also a quickening of breath all around. The dark beyond the fence seems thicker. They keep glancing at the road, expecting headlights. Evan pushes them on, but even he hesitates when they reach Sergeant Daniel Reeves's grave. It stands out, new marble, polished and sharp-edged, the Marine emblem catching moonlight. The child's drawing flutters against it, tiny and bright even in darkness. For a moment no one speaks. Ryan breaks it with a half-laugh. What's this guy, a general or something? Lucas bends to read. Marine, Iraq. His voice falters, maybe at the dates. 25 when he died. Milo swallows and says nothing. Evan tilts his head, unreadable, then shakes the can anyway. The paint splashes across the white, jagged and uneven. The others don't cheer this time. The hiss dies quick. A car hum passes somewhere distant. They freeze until it's gone. Silence pours back thicker than before. Lucas mutters that maybe they should go. Evan shrugs but shoulders his pack. Done for now. They retrace steps fast, laughter forced and thin. One drops a can. It rolls before being scooped up. They slip out the fence and disappear into black backroads, leaving a scatter of prints pressed deep in the frost. Behind them, the cemetery is altered. The paint glows faint in the moonlight, violent and out of place. Sergeant Reeves's stone wears the wound worst. Red streak across the eagle and over the taped child's drawing. The cold holds everything still again, but the stillness has changed. What was quiet respect now waits with a different weight, one that will not stay buried until morning. By the time Hank finishes his coffee and hauls the first bundle of fresh flags from the shed, the frost is thinning and the sky has turned a brittle winter blue. He crosses back through the gate with his wheelbarrow, boots crunching. Routine carries him. First the main path, then the western edge, where the older stones tilt and moss grows deep. He hums under his breath, tuneless but steady. Years of mornings have taught him that quiet work is its own prayer. When he rounds the road towards Sergeant Reeves's grave, the humming dies. It hits him first, as color where no color should be. A brutal smear of red across white marble. His breath stops short. For a moment he thinks some winter fungus or rust has bled from the bronze star emblem, but then his eyes focus. Paint. Fresh enough to glisten where dew still clings. The marine eagle is half drowned in crude loops, and the laminated child's drawing is slashed with the same jagged red. Hank's jaw tightens. He sets the barrow down hard enough to rattle the flags. Slowly, he takes a step forward, then another, until he's kneeling at the stone. His glove brushes the paint. It smears wet and stark. Not dry yet. He glances around without thinking, scanning rows, fence, tree lines, but there's no one. Only the cold and the pale light. A crow screams once and flaps away. He swallows something hot that rises from his chest. 40 years tending this ground, and no one has ever dared this. Candy wrappers after Memorial Day, sure. Kids climbing the fence sometimes, but not this. not paint on a Marine's name. His hands move before thought can catch them. He pulls a rag from his pocket, spits into it, and rubs at the stain. The cloth comes away red. The marble barely changes. He tries again, harder, until the rag shreds, and his breath comes fast with effort and anger. It's no use. Spray paint has its own permanence. He sits back on his heels, breathing clouds, and stares. The small laminated drawing curls where paint has eaten through tape. Hank peels it away gently, but the child's marker lines are ruined, red bleeding across the stick figure Marine. He places it aside on the grass like something fragile. For a long while he just kneels there, hand on the cold stone. Anger churns into something heavier, a grief he can't name. Not only for Reeves, though that too, but for what it means when kids do this. For how easily forgetting grows. At last he stands, slow and stiff. He takes his phone from his coat and snaps 2 quick pictures. Evidence, though he doesn't know yet for whom. Maybe the sheriff, maybe the VFW commander. He hates the idea of Facebook outrage, but someone will need to know. He debates calling right now, thumb hovering but stops. He doesn't want this place filled with cruisers and gossip yet. He wants quiet long enough to think. Instead, he moves through the nearby rows, scanning for more. It doesn't take long to find other wounds. Crude faces sprayed across stones from older wars, a snapped flagpole, crushed wreaths. His chest grows heavier with each find. The damage isn't everywhere, but enough to feel like violation. When he finally wheels back toward the gate, the barrow rattles under the weight of torn flags and ruined tokens. He pauses at the entrance and looks back once. Morning sun is brighter now, revealing every scar. The place that had been still and honorable just an hour ago feels raw and exposed. He doesn't notice a tall man on the far sidewalk yet, a runner slowing near the fence, scanning the rows. Hank only knows that something sacred has been broken, and that the quiet of the cemetery no longer comforts. It accuses, it demands witness, and it will not let the day proceed as if nothing happened. By the time Hank drives his battered pickup back down Main Street, a quiet storm has already started to move through town. He had made one call after leaving the cemetery, just one, to the clerk at the town hall, a practical woman named Ruth Everett who keeps the keys to everything. Hank's voice was tight, almost clipped when he told her what he found. She promised to notify the sheriff and the Veterans Council, and in a small town, that means the news has already started its own march, long before any siren. At the Depot Cafe, the morning regulars sit in a half-circle near the big window, hands wrapped around thick ceramic mugs. When Ruth stops in for her first coffee, she says only, "Vandalism up at the cemetery." That's enough. Heads turn. Mugs pause mid-air. No one needs details. The word itself is heavy enough. "Whose stones?" asks Ed Walker, Korean War vet. His voice as cracked as the linoleum counter. Ruth doesn't answer, just shakes her head once and says, "Bad." A few nods slowly. A few curse under breath. By the time she's out the door with her coffee, the first Facebook post is up. They defaced Reeves' grave. A single blurred photo, Hank's, forwarded by Ruth, rides the current faster than any town meeting could. Phones buzz in coat pockets along Main Street. In the post office line, people lean close to show one another the picture. The Marine Eagle buried under red loops. The child's drawing smeared. Mrs. Hanley from the library whispers "animals," and the word echoes with disgust and fear. Outside the hardware store, 2 men in Carhartt jackets study the image and fall into low talk about kids these days, but also about where the fence is weak. How easy it would have been. At the high school, word lands before the first bell. Screens glow in hallways. Whispers flare and die as teachers walk past. Some students smirk, some look uneasy. A few go pale. No one knows yet who, but rumors bloom fast. Names tossed carelessly, guesses sharpened by grudges. By lunch, the principal has called an impromptu assembly for the next day. Respect for community property is the official reason, though everyone knows what it's really about. Meanwhile, Hank sits in his truck outside the hardware store, watching the digital tide rise from a distance. He doesn't join the online conversation. He doesn't even own an account, His call to Ruth had been about fixing, not shaming. But shame is loose now and can't be pulled back. He wonders if Reeves's mother has seen it yet. If someone will think to warn her before she opens her phone and finds her son's grave violated in the public square. At the sheriff's office, two deputies finish their morning coffee while reading the same posts. Sheriff Delaney, a big man with slow words, orders a drive-by patrol and says to check the fence line. He knows full well that solving it won't be fast. Teenagers, maybe cameras somewhere. But cameras fail in the dark and fences have too many holes. Even in houses where no one has social media, the news travels. Landlines ring. Old friends call each other with clipped phrases. Did you hear? Reeves, stone. Spray paint. Silence follows each telling, the kind of silence only small towns know when something sacred is touched. Somewhere in the web of calls and posts and worried talk, the name of Cole Harris surfaces. People know him. The quiet Marine who moved back 2 years ago, walks early, keeps mostly to himself. A neighbor texts another neighbor. Cole lives near the cemetery. He'll see it. No one knows yet that he already has. As afternoon sun begins to weaken and frost returns to the edges of shade, the weight of what happened settles fully. Not anger alone, something slower and heavier. Disbelief that anyone could cross that fence and do what was done. A feeling, spreading from house to house, that someone will need to stand and answer. No one says it out loud, but in a town built on memory and service, this won't be left to hashtags and quiet mutters. Something older is stirring, an expectation that when disrespect enters sacred ground, respect must walk back in and take its place. Cole Harris ran before sunrise most days, though ran was generous now. His knees had taken enough pounding in 20 years of Marine service. What he did looked more like a long, quiet patrol. Ball cap low, gloves tucked, boots laced instead of sneakers, always the same dark jacket without patches. The town had learned to nod but not stop him. He liked it that way, a route, a rhythm, silence. That morning the cold bit deeper than usual. Ice glazed the ditches. His breath came white. He carried no phone, only a watch he'd had since Afghanistan. Past the grain co-op, down the long fence line that marked the back of the veterans' cemetery. His loop always took him by there. Sometimes he paused, sometimes he didn't. It wasn't nostalgia. It was watchfulness. Marine scan, even years later. Today, something wrong snagged his attention before he even reached the gate. Color where none should be. A smear of red breaking the clean geometry of white stones. He slowed, heart rate climbing for a reason that had nothing to do with exertion. Another step, and the damage resolved. Obscene loops and jagged tags across markers, a flagpole bent near its base. His eyes caught on one grave in particular, and his feet stopped moving altogether. Sergeant Daniel Reeves. Cole had never met him. He was deployed elsewhere when Reeves came back under a flag, but he knew his name. Every Marine in town did. He'd seen the funeral convoy, had saluted from the roadside that bitter February day. Reeves was one of theirs, a younger brother in the long line. Cole approached the grave quietly, boots crunching frost. The paint was still glossy, bright against the polished marble. It bled across the eagle into the word Fidelis. The child's drawing lay ripped, half buried under frozen grass. He crouched, one glove grazing the cold stone. Then the paint, sticky, recent. Memory struck fast and hard. Patrols at dawn. Names on wall memorials. The quiet work of carrying home those who didn't get to finish the fight. Something deep and old flared. Not rage exactly, but a heat that made his jaw lock and breath slow. He stood and scanned the fence line, a habit drilled long ago. Know who's near, know the ground. Only the wind and the distant hum of a truck. For a moment, Cole thought about dialing the sheriff right here. He pictured cruisers, tape, photos, statements, but the idea soured quickly. There would be procedure, yes, but also spectacle. A place meant for reverence would turn into a scene. Reeves's name would trend for the wrong reason. Cole hated that thought. Instead, he did what Marines do when the mission isn't yet clear. Observe, prepare, decide. He took 2 quick photos, not for sharing, just record. then slid the phone back into his pocket. He stood a while longer, shoulders rising and falling, until the sharp heat inside cooled to something cold and deliberate. Walking out through the gate, he looked once more at the wounded headstone. "I got you," he muttered under breath, almost soundless, words swept away in the wind. His route home bent long and slow, mind already cataloguing tools. Wire brushes, solvent, gloves, spare flags. Maybe water from the old drum in his shed. He pictured the work step by step, methodical and quiet. The same way he'd broken down weapons on patrol. One part at a time, nothing rushed, nothing missed. By the time he reached his porch and the coffee pot had finished its slow percolate, the plan had settled fully. This wasn't about anger. It was about answer. Someone had come in the dark and written contempt across a Marine's name. Broad daylight would bring something else. Respect returned, without waiting for permission or press. Cole laced his boots tighter, poured coffee into a battered thermos, and went to the garage to gather what the morning would require. Cole drove back to the cemetery just as the first hard sunlight cut across Main Street and burned the mist from the river flats. He parked a short way down from the gate, an old Marine habit of not blocking an exit, and stepped out with the thermos and nothing else. No tools yet, not until he knew exactly what he faced. The air was sharp enough to sting his lungs as he walked the path Hank had taken hours earlier. He could see where the caretaker's wheelbarrow had left thin tire tracks through the frost. The damage was worse in full light. Spray paint on stone doesn't fade. It seems to grow brighter the more the day advances. Half a dozen markers carried crude scrawls now loud against their pale surfaces. But it was Reeves' grave that stopped him again and held him. He stood for a long time without touching anything, just reading the name carved deep, Sergeant Daniel Reeves. Beneath it the short line Semper Fidelis. Dates that made Cole's stomach tighten. 1987 to 2012. 25, young enough to still have doubt in his eyes the first time he'd stepped onto desert tarmac. Old enough to have led fire teams by the end. He didn't know Reeves's story in detail. Only pieces. Sangjin, Helmand Province, a patrol that hit an IED, quick death, they said. The bronze star etched below confirmed what Cole suspected. There had been valor in that last moment. The Vandals' red loop cut straight across the word Fidelis, faithful. The desecration was ugly, but what jarred Cole more was how fragile memory looked when marred. Families work so hard to hold on to names, to make a life visible after war swallows it. Yet one night's careless malice can smear over years of service. He knelt finally, resting one knee on cold ground, and ran a bare hand along the unpainted edge of the marble. Cool, solid, heavy with the weight of someone else's sacrifice. Under his glove the paint still felt slightly tacky, recent enough that the culprits would have gone home just before dawn. He scanned the tree line again. Frost bent where sneakers had scuffed the grass, prints half frozen now. No easy trail, but proof someone thought this place was just a blank canvas. Cole's own service rose uninvited. Sand, diesel fumes, a friend's laugh silenced mid-sentence. He thought of graves far away, markers improvised from ammo crates until a unit could fly a body home. The reverence drilled into Marines from day one. Leave no one behind, honor the fallen, had been defied here. Not by an enemy, but by children who didn't understand. He pulled his phone from his pocket, opened the quiet photo folder, and took new shots. Straight on, close detail of the smear across the eagle, the ripped child's drawing lying like a wounded flag at the base. Then he slid the phone away and stayed kneeling, elbows on knees, head bowed. Not praying exactly, but giving the moment its due. After a while he stood. The decision had already formed on his walk home earlier, but standing here hardened it. No long posts, no loud confrontation first. Action. Quiet, deliberate action. He pictured what was needed. Solvent, brushes, warm water so the stone wouldn't crack, gloves, rags, new flags. And time. A long morning bent to work. He turned back toward the truck, pausing once at the gate. The town would talk and investigate. The sheriff would probably circle through. But before all of that, the grave would be clean again. Reeves deserved that. So did every other name here. Cole didn't need permission to do what Marines do, take care of their own. The cold wind rose as he walked back to the road, lifting his jacket collar and carrying away his breath in quick white ribbons. He didn't notice the first car slowing as it passed, a driver glancing at the lone man in the cemetery. Soon enough, people would know, but for now, only the stones bore witness as Cole Harris left to gather his gear and return to the work waiting in silence. Cole drove home with the images still burning behind his eyes, but the road and the rhythm of the tires gave him time to think. Action was clear: clean the grave, restore what could be restored, but there were other decisions to weigh. The phone on the seat beside him felt heavier than it should. He could tap out a quick message to the sheriff. Sheriff Delaney would send a cruiser and take a report. Or he could post one of the photos to the town's veterans group online, and the outrage would flare instantly. Hundreds of comments, names demanded, punishments imagined. But both paths had a noise to them that felt wrong against what he had just stood in front of. By the time he backed his truck into the narrow drive beside his house, the coffee in his thermos had cooled and his jaw ached from clenching. He killed the engine and sat in the sudden quiet. The house around him was spare. Framed photos of his old units on one wall, boots lined under a bench, a rack of neatly oiled tools in the garage. He went inside, filled the coffee pot, and stood waiting as it gurgled and hissed. His phone stayed on the counter, screen black. He tried to imagine Reeves's mother seeing the pictures first in a public feed, strangers piling words on top of her grief. It made something inside him twist. She'd buried her son with all the ceremony a small town could offer, and now some faceless feed would add a second wound. Cole poured a mug, paced once across the kitchen, then picked up the phone anyway. He scrolled to Delaney's number, thumb hovering, but didn't press call. Procedure had its place, but this felt different. He could always file a report later. First, the stone needed to be whole again. He stepped into the garage, flipped on a single bare bulb, and surveyed the wall of gear. Years of habits lined up there. Solvent, soft wire brushes, protective gloves, canvas tarps. He pulled down a crate and began to fill it with what the job would require. A battered kneeling pad, bottles of cleaning solution labeled for granite and marble, extra rags. He found a new Marine Corps flag folded in plastic. He'd bought it last summer for no reason, and now knew why. Each item went into the truck bed with a deliberate clunk. Outside, the cold deepened. Sun was high but weak. A thin wind worried the bare branches. Cole worked steadily, his body falling into the efficient motions it had learned long ago. Anticipate, prepare, don't rush. He added a 5-gallon jug of warm water to keep the chemicals from freezing. A small propane heater for his hands, a new roll of tape for the child's drawing if he could salvage it. He paused only once, leaning against the tailgate, sipping the last of the morning coffee. Still no call made, no post typed. This wasn't about hiding what happened. It was about how the first answer should arrive. He wanted the place to look like respect again before the town's louder machinery rolled in. Sometimes you lead by doing quietly before the noise begins. The decision settled fully as he capped the thermos and tossed it in the cab. He would return first as a Marine, not as a witness giving statements. He would put the ground right, so when the sheriff came with cameras and tape, the story they told would not be one of ruin, but of restoration already underway. Cole climbed back into the truck, engine coughing to life. The rearview mirror caught a slice of his face, older now, scarred in small ways, but steady. He nodded once at himself, an unconscious pre-combat gesture from another life, then pulled onto the road. The cemetery waited, and so did the work. No hashtags, no speeches, just one man, one grave, and a job to be done before anger could swallow remembrance whole. By late morning, Main Street had warmed enough for thin streams of melted frost to run along the curbs, but the air was still knife-sharp. A few early shoppers drifted between the post office and the bakery. They glanced up when an old dark green pickup passed. Dented tailgate, Marine Corps bumper sticker half peeled away by years of weather. Cole Harris at the wheel, eyes forward, no music. The bed held a crate lashed down with paracord, a 5-gallon water jug, and a roll of canvas. There were no markings, no flags, nothing to say where he was headed, yet something about the slow, purposeful way he drove made people look twice. At the cemetery, he parked off to one side of the gate. No one else was there. Hank's tire tracks from the wheelbarrow were still faintly visible, curved and crisp across thawing grass. Cole cut the engine, sat a moment, then stepped out and lowered the tailgate with care. The cold hit him full in the face, bright and sobering. He worked methodically, pulling gloves tight, arranging his kit, solvent bottles in one corner, brushes sorted by stiffness, clean rags stacked, heater set aside but ready. Each placement quiet, deliberate, the way you stage gear before a patrol. He paused at the gate, looked out across the rows. The silence was deeper now, heavier for what he knew lay inside. It felt wrong to cross the threshold without asking permission, though there was no one to grant it. So he touched the iron post with a bare hand, a gesture more instinct than ritual, and went in. The damage seemed even louder in daylight. Red slashes shouted from the pale markers, raw wounds in orderly ranks. Cole's gaze swept the field, but settled inevitably on Reeves's grave. He walked straight there first, boots leaving dark impressions where frost lingered in shade. Kneeling, he set the crate down and unscrewed a solvent cap. The chemical smell cut through the winter air as he poured a measured splash onto a rag and pressed it gently to the paint. It didn't lift right away. He didn't expect it to. He kept pressure steady, small circles, patient. Marines are taught to break down hard tasks into movements that can be repeated until done. Wipe, check, adjust. After a minute, he rinsed the cloth in warm water from the jug, steam rising in small ghosts. The red came away slowly, one stubborn smear at a time. Now and then he sat back on his heels to check angles, making sure he wasn't grinding grit into the stone. His breath fogged and drifted across the marble. Time fell away. There was only the quiet scrape of brush and rag, the occasional clink of a bottle. A crow perched nearby and watched. An hour passed before anyone else noticed. A delivery driver slowed, curious at the sight of a man kneeling alone among headstones, with tools spread like an altar. The driver didn't stop, but by the next corner he was already texting, Marine cleaning Reeves's grave himself. News travels fast when it matters. Cole ignored the small waves of sound beginning beyond the fence. He worked steadily, shifting to other stones once the worst of Reeves's was clear. Each name deserved more than a quick pass. He scrubbed tags from older markers too, moving down the row like a silent sentry reclaiming ground. When he finally sat back and poured the last of the warm water across Reeves's stone, the marble shone pale and whole again. Only faint shadows of red remained at the edges, ghosts to be chased off with time and more scrubbing. Cole unwrapped the new flag and raised it on the reset pole, the cloth snapping once in the cold breeze before hanging proud and still. He didn't speak, didn't salute yet. That would wait. For now, the work itself was the statement, quiet, careful, witnessed only by stone and crow and the occasional passerby. Somewhere beyond the trees, a car slowed again. Somewhere downtown, a phone buzzed with a message about what one Marine was doing alone. But Cole paid no mind. Mission first, noise later. The dead deserved their due before the living decided how to talk about it. Cole had learned long ago that silence could be a shield and a tool. In the desert, words wasted breath and gave away position. Here, among cold stones and winter air, silence felt like respect. He moved from one scarred marker to the next, with the same quiet, deliberate care he had once used to clear a weapon after patrol. No rush, no wasted motion. At Sergeant Reeves's grave, the marble had yielded under patient scrubbing. The hateful red was nearly gone, just pale shadows where solvent would need to sit longer. Cole laid a fresh cloth across those faint stains and let it work while he turned to the others. A World War II pilot's name had been slashed with a crude smiley face. Cole knelt, brushing frost from the base, fingers steady despite the cold biting through his gloves. He poured warm water to soften the paint, then small circles with a soft brush until the worst dissolved. He rinsed often, changing cloths before they could drag grit. The morning sun climbed, throwing sharp light across the field. Shadows of the headstones stretched thin and long. Somewhere far off, church bells rang the quarter hour. Cole didn't pause. Kneel, scrub, rinse, wipe. Every so often, he shifted to stretch his knees, then returned to the work. He spoke once, softly, as if to the stones themselves. "We'll get you back." It sounded strange in the open air, and made him smile a little before going on. After an hour and a half, his shoulders ached. But the field was changing. The garish red loops faded one by one. The white granite slowly reclaimed its dignity. The cold was sharp enough to sting lungs, yet sweat prickled under his jacket. He took a long swallow from his thermos, eyes scanning the rows. For the first time that morning, a small measure of relief touched him. The place was beginning to look whole. A crunch of gravel behind him broke the quiet. He turned, half expecting a patrol car, but it was just a man walking his dog along the outer path. The man stopped, unsure whether to intrude. Cole gave him a brief nod and returned to scrubbing. The man hesitated, then lifted a hand in silent salute before moving on. Cole didn't watch him go, but the gesture stayed with him, wordless acknowledgement between strangers. Soon after, another figure appeared. An older woman in a heavy coat, pausing by the fence. She stood for a minute, maybe recognizing the names, maybe just watching. Cole kept at the work, and when he glanced up again, she was gone. A small, wrapped bouquet of store flowers now leaned against the gatepost. The heater hissed softly where he'd set it near the jug to keep water from freezing. He changed gloves, flexing fingers stiff with cold and chemicals. Then back to Reeves's stone. The last of the paint was loosening. The letters were clear again, sharp and black against white. He smoothed a rag across the surface one final time and stepped back. The bronze marine emblem gleamed faintly. Above it, the new flag cracked once in a gust, strong and clean. Cole took off his gloves and laid a hand flat on the marble. Cold radiated up his palm, but the stone felt solid, restored. He let the weight of the moment settle. No speeches, no photos, just a quiet internal report. Task complete, ground held. The wind shifted, carrying faint sounds of town, a school bell, a truck tailgate slamming. Life resuming beyond the fence. Here, stillness reclaimed its place. Cole repacked slowly, folding tarps, rinsing brushes at the jug, and sealing bottles tight. He stacked soiled rags in a bucket for later disposal. No trace left but clean stones and one new flag snapping steady. Before he left, he stood square before Reeves's grave and raised a crisp salute. It was not for show. No one was near enough to see. It was for the man beneath the marble and for every name whose silence deserved guarding. Then Cole dropped his hand, turned, and walked back to the truck. By the time he reached the gate, he could hear tires on gravel behind him. Someone else arriving. The work was done, but the story wasn't. Quiet action had gone first. Now, he suspected, witnesses would follow. Cole had planned to finish and slip away before anyone came. He liked the idea of leaving the ground restored and letting the place speak for itself. But the world doesn't stay empty once something sacred is touched. Even before he finished packing his gear, the sound of tires on gravel grew louder. A grey Subaru eased to a stop near the gate, careful not to block his truck. The driver's window rolled down just enough for a woman's face to appear, hair tucked under a wool cap. "You the one fixing them?" she asked quietly. Cole straightened from the tailgate and gave a single nod. "Just cleaning," he said. She looked past him to the rows, lingered on Reeves's grave where the new flag moved sharp against the sky. Her face shifted, anger softening to something else, maybe gratitude or relief. She didn't get out of the car, just said thank you, and drove off. The word hung in the crisp air after she'd gone. 10 minutes later, a jogger arrived, sweat freezing on his brow. He stopped at the fence, unsure, then stepped inside. His eyes roved across the headstones, finding the ones now scrubbed pale. "Saw it online," he said, breath fogging. Didn't think anyone would be out here already." Cole gave a small shrug. The jogger hesitated, then asked if he could help. Cole shook his head gently. Almost done. The man stood silent for a while, then reached into his pocket, pulled out a folded American flag patch, maybe torn from a jacket, and laid it at Reeves's base. No ceremony, just quiet respect. Then he left. Word moved faster than Cole expected. By noon, a handful of people stood at the fence or slowly walked among the stones. Not a crowd, just a slow gathering. Some came alone, hands deep in pockets, eyes low. Some came in twos, older couples, a mother and child. They didn't speak much, and when they did, it was soft. "My uncle's here," one woman whispered as she brushed snow from a stone nearby. Another man stooped to reset a fallen wreath without prompting. Phones came out now and then, but mostly to photograph names or flags, not selfies. A few took pictures of Cole's work from a distance, then seemed to think better of approaching. The mood wasn't spectacle. It was witness. Hank returned too, trudging with his wheelbarrow half full of fresh flags. He stopped when he saw the clean rows, his lined face shifting from tension to something close to relief. "You beat me to it," he said. Cole shook his head. "Not a race." Hank took a long look at Reeves's grave, nodded once and muttered, "Good man," though whether he meant the one beneath the stone or the one standing there wasn't clear. They didn't shake hands. They didn't need to. A small boy broke the stillness at one point, maybe 7 or 8, trailing behind his mother. He pointed at the new flag. "Who's that?" he asked. The mother knelt to whisper something. Cole caught only "Marine" and "Hero." The boy grew solemn, tugged his cap low, and said nothing else. By early afternoon, the quiet cemetery had taken on a different life. Not loud, not crowded, but awake. Each visitor seemed to add back a layer of dignity stolen in the night. Cole didn't direct anyone. He simply kept working until there was nothing left to clean. Then he stood, brushed frost from his knees, and gathered his gear. He felt the eyes of strangers on his back, but not in a way that demanded attention, more like a silent escort. As he closed the tailgate, Hank was beside him again, one hand on the truck rail. "World gets strange," Hank said, "but folks still know what matters." Cole gave a small grunt of agreement, not trusting himself with more words. When he turned for a final look, Reeves's grave stood bright and whole. The child's drawing taped fresh again, colors unspoiled. Around it, other stones were clear, flags upright. People lingered still, scattered sentries who hadn't known they would be part of this day, but stayed anyway. Cole touched 2 fingers to the brim of his cap in a brief, private salute, then slid into the truck. He didn't wave or speak as he rolled out the gate. The work was done. The watching had begun. And sometimes he knew that was how healing starts. One pair of hands making things right until others remember how to stand beside what's worth keeping. The watchers who lingered did not come for spectacle. They came because something wordless had passed through the town and landed here. As the small cluster of neighbors spread out among the rows, memory began to surface, not all of it clear or polished, but enough to stitch the names back into lives. A man in a heavy brown coat stepped close to Reeves's grave and removed his cap. He was older, hair silvered but still cut like someone who'd once followed regulations. His name was Tom Calhoun. He had coached Little League long ago. He stood quietly, then said to Hank, who had returned with fresh flags, "I remember Danny at 9, pitcher's mound. Could throw a fastball that made the other kids blink." Hank just nodded and let the story settle on the cold air. Nearer the gate, a woman set down a grocery bag and pulled from it a thermos and 2 paper cups. She poured coffee and handed one to the jogger who'd returned with his small flag patch, now missing from his pocket. "You knew him?" she asked. The man shook his head. "No, just know what it means when a Marine dies young." They didn't say more. They just drank quietly, steam drifting. A teacher from the elementary school arrived on foot, scarf wrapped high. Her eyes went first to the child's drawing taped back in place. She reached out but didn't touch it, smiling sadly. "My class made those," she murmured to no one in particular. "We told them about service, about sacrifice. I wonder which one drew this." She left a folded construction paper star at the base before stepping away. Across the rows, Cole worked on a last small patch of paint on a Korean war stone, but his pace had slowed. He could feel the change in the air. The place no longer felt violated but claimed again. People were talking in low tones, telling half-remembered connections. My cousin served with his unit. I think I worked with his father at the mill. Didn't his sister play clarinet? The web of relation tightened, each thread pulling the town closer. Someone placed a small battery candle near Reeves's grave. Another man arrived carrying a rake and quietly began tidying winter debris at the fence line. Hank caught his eye and gave a small, grateful nod. No one organized. It just happened, one act joining another. A teenage girl came alone, hood up, hands jammed in sweatshirt pocket. She didn't cross the fence at first, just watched from the road. After a long minute, she stepped through and knelt at a stone 2 rows away. Not Reeves's, but one marked Vietnam 1969. She brushed away frost with her sleeve and stayed there a long time. Perhaps a grandfather, perhaps just an apology by proxy. When she rose, her eyes were wet. Cole eventually straightened and stretched his back. He didn't want to intrude on these private offerings. His work had been to clear the ground, not claim it. Yet fragments reached him anyway. Fastball. Helmand, always smiling. Snippets of a life he hadn't known but felt bound to defend. He packed his gear slowly, giving the crowd space to linger. Each person seemed to have found a small task, setting upright a wreath, clearing twigs, straightening a crooked photo. The work was gentle, almost shy, but it reclaimed the field more effectively than outrage could have. When the noon bell from the Methodist church drifted over the hill, Cole stood at the tailgate and looked back. The cemetery had changed again, no longer a scene of damage, but a quiet gathering place. The names were being spoken aloud, even if only a few syllables at a time. And names spoken are never fully lost. He glanced once more at Reeves's marker. White, clean, the child's drawing bright under new tape, a single new bouquet of winter carnations tucked against the base. The Marine flag above it snapped in a clean gust. Cole felt the familiar stillness that comes after a mission ends. Not joy, not relief exactly, but something steady. The work had been done. Others had come to hold the line. He climbed into the truck, one hand lingering on the wheel as if anchoring himself before he drove away. Behind him, voices murmured, small stories adding themselves to the day, rebuilding what the night had tried to erase. It happened almost by accident. Cole had climbed back out of the truck once more to collect a dropped rag, and when he turned, a few of the people who had stayed were standing together near Reeves's grave. Not crowding, just there. Henk was among them, his cap off, and so was the man with the dog, and the teacher with her scarf drawn tight. Someone had righted the bent flagpole so it stood straight now, and the new Marine Corps flag moved in a sharp snap of winter air. Cole paused beside his open tailgate. The quiet was deep enough to hear the crows shifting in the cedars. He hadn't intended to do anything more, just finish, leave the place restored, let the day move on. But his eyes fell on the stone he'd scrubbed clean, on the word Fidelis unmarred again, and on the small tape drawing that now looked almost brave against the marble. Something in his spine straightened. Without really thinking, he walked back the short distance and took position before Reeves's grave. Boots together on the cold ground, gloves tucked under one arm. He stood still a moment, breath slow and visible. Then in one fluid motion that muscle memory still owned, he raised his right hand to the brim of his cap and held the salute. It was crisp, exact, not for show, not slowed or embellished. Just the true gesture, perfect and clean, palm slightly forward, elbow locked. He held it long enough for the wind to rustle the flag and for the murmurs behind him to still completely. Something shifted across the small group. Hank, hat already off, straightened his stooped shoulders. The jogger stood ramrod for a beat, hand coming up in an awkward but earnest imitation. The teacher lowered her scarf and stood still, eyes shining. Even the boy who'd come earlier with his mother sensed the moment. He tugged at his mother's hand and she bent to whisper. Then he too stood tall, as only a child trying to honor something can. No one spoke. The only sounds were wind through cedar and the faint creak of new tape, holding the drawing flat. Cole dropped his hand at last, slow and deliberate. He stepped back, looked once at the cleaned stone, then at the faces watching. He didn't smile, but his eyes softened, a quiet acknowledgement of shared witness. He gave Hank a brief nod, and Hank returned it gravely. The woman with the grocery bag seemed to realize she was holding her breath. She exhaled and wiped a tear with the back of her glove. The jogger, voice low and rough, said just one word: Semper. Cole's head turned a fraction, enough to mark he'd heard, but he didn't break the silence further. It was not ceremony in any formal sense. There was no bugle, no folded flags, no commanding officer to call attention. It was smaller, rougher, more human. Yet in its quiet it felt weightier than any speech. The grave had been violated and then restored. The town had begun to gather. Now one Marine had saluted, and that act seemed to settle something invisible. People lingered after, reluctant to speak. A few hands touched other stones, brief brushes across cold granite. A man in work boots knelt and righted another fallen marker 2 rows away. The teenage girl who had come alone earlier stood at the edge, watching Cole with wide, unreadable eyes. Cole turned eventually and walked back to his truck. No wave, no words. The salute had said what needed saying. He loaded the last of his gear and closed the tailgate softly. As he started the engine, the crowd seemed to know better than to call out or stop him. They simply stood, caps off, heads slightly bowed until the green pickup eased out of sight. Only then did voices return, low and respectful, carrying small fragments of story again. Reeves's name passed among them like a password, each telling another piece. But the center of the morning, the clean stone, the raised hand, remained untouched. In the heart of winter, in a place meant for memory, respect had walked back in and taken its post. Not long after Cole's truck disappeared down the road, the low rumble of a patrol car broke the cold quiet. The familiar white and green Ford Explorer turned slowly through the gates, tires crunching over the thawing gravel. Sheriff Delaney was behind the wheel, a heavy man with a calm way of carrying authority. His young deputy, Morales, sat in the passenger seat, not yet 30, and still learning when to speak and when to hold silence. The small group of townspeople, still scattered among the rows, shifted but didn't scatter. They watched the vehicle approach the center path and stop near Sergeant Reeves's grave. Delaney stepped out first, broad shoulders hunched against the wind, his tan Stetson pulled low. Morales followed, eyes wide, not at the cold, but at what he saw. For a moment the sheriff said nothing. His gaze moved over the scene, the graves scrubbed pale and clean, flags upright and new, a faint dampness on the marble where solvent had dried. The scent of chemical cleaner and cold granite lingered. Then his eyes dropped to the flag above Reeves's stone and the small tape drawing beneath. Vivid and unspoiled again. "Looks like somebody already handled the damage," Delaney said finally, voice quiet but carrying. He wasn't asking a question. Hank stepped forward a little, hands in jacket pockets. "Marine was here," he said. "Cole Harris did it himself. He didn't add more. Didn't need to." Delaney nodded once, as though that made perfect sense. "Figures," he murmured. His eyes traced the other stones, noting how thorough the work was. "Hell of a job." Morales crouched to look closer at the base of Reeves's marker, running a finger over an almost invisible ghost of paint. "They did this last night?" "Had to be," Hank answered. "Fresh this morning." The deputy's jaw tightened. "Kids?" "Most likely." Hank's shrug was half weary, half angry. Too easy to slip through the fence. Delaney turned slowly, scanning the gathered faces. "Anyone see who it was?" Heads shook. A few murmured no. The sheriff seemed unsurprised. "We'll check the camera on Main and maybe the gas station road," he said, almost to himself. "But my guess is it'll be kids who thought they were funny till it stopped being funny." He squatted briefly, knees cracking, and looked at the restored stone. "Marine did this quiet, huh?" He asked Hank again. "Quiet," Hank said. "Didn't even call." Delaney let out a slow breath. "Right way, maybe." He straightened, pulled a small notepad from his coat and wrote a few lines. Morales started snapping photos with his phone, official record for the file. But the pictures now showed repair, not ruin. Clean stones, flags righted, a community standing nearby, not a crime scene but a place reclaimed. When the deputy moved to tape off an area for evidence, Delaney raised a hand. "No tape," he said. "Ground's already been put right. We'll take what we need and go." Morales hesitated, then nodded. Before leaving, the sheriff walked to Reeves's grave and stood a long moment. He didn't salute. He wasn't military, but he touched the brim of his Stetson and dipped his head once. Then he turned to the small cluster of townsfolk and said only, "We'll do the paperwork. You folks did the important part." The crowd seemed to exhale. No clapping, no chatter. Just relief that authority had arrived, not to take over, but to respect what had been done. Delaney climbed back into the cruiser, Morales following with his quiet phone full of pictures. The car rolled out slowly, lights off, just another vehicle on a cold road. But those who remained felt something settle. The official world had seen, recorded, and wisely chosen not to drown this morning in sirens. As the sound of tires faded, the cemetery returned to hush. A few neighbors stayed to finish small tasks, straightening a wreath, brushing off one last stone. Then one by one they left too, until only Hank remained, pulling his wheelbarrow back toward the shed. Overhead, the Marine flag snapped once, sharp and bright, and then fell back into stillness. The quiet that followed the sheriff's departure lasted only a few hours. By late afternoon, the same current that had carried news of the vandalism and of Cole's work brought another ripple. Names. Social media posts, text chains, and a few sharp-eyed neighbors had pieced things together. A red paint smear on a jacket, a shoe print matched to a pair of size 12s, half-whispered boasts overheard at the gas station. By early evening, parents knew, and parents in a small town do what they have always done. They gather their children and face what can't be. Hidden, just before sunset, 2 SUVs, and a dented minivan pulled off the narrow road and stopped, awkwardly outside the cemetery fence. Doors opened. 4 boys climbed out, the oldest barely 18, the youngest maybe 15. Behind them came their mothers and fathers, faces pale with worry, anger and shame. The wind was picking up, carrying the smell of wood smoke from town. A few neighbors had lingered by chance, and now straightened at the sight. Hank was there too, walking his end-of-day check, coat zipped high. He looked up and saw the small group and felt his stomach tighten. The fathers steered their sons toward the gate, hands heavy on shoulders. The boys looked smaller than the swaggering shadows who had crept through here the night before. Hoods down, hands shoved deep into pockets, eyes darting anywhere but the stones. Cole had returned as well, though he hadn't planned to. After leaving earlier, he'd driven home and tried to shake the day off, but something told him the job wasn't finished. He'd come back with just a flashlight and an empty thermos, meaning to check for frost on the stones. Now he found himself standing near Reeves's grave when the group entered. The timing felt almost deliberate, though no one had called him. The parents stopped a respectful distance away. One of the mothers, tall, pale from worry, spoke first. "Mr. Harris," she said, voice low but carrying. "They need to see." Cole didn't answer right away. He looked at the boys one by one. Evan, the oldest, tall but slumped now. Lucas with his hood half up. Ryan, hands twisting. Milo, youngest, eyes wet but angry at himself more than anyone. Cole's face stayed still, unreadable. He motioned toward Reeves's stone. "Come here." The boys obeyed, boots crunching frost, heads lowered. They stood before the grave that only hours before they'd defaced. The marble gleamed again. The word Fidelis was whole, the child's drawing retaped and bright. The new flag cracked in the sharp air. Cole let the silence work for a long time until one of them shifted, unable to stand still. "Do you know who he was?" Cole asked quietly. They shook their heads. Evan tried a halting Marine, but his voice failed. Cole's gaze didn't soften. "Sergeant Daniel Reeves. Born right here. Played ball across the street. Deployed twice. Killed by an IED at 25. His voice stayed even, but each fact landed heavy. His mother lives on Pine Street. His sister teaches at the elementary. Some of you might have had her. The boys' faces fell deeper into shadow. The parents looked down, ashamed and protective at once. "This isn't paint on stone," Cole said finally. "It's on somebody's son, on a promise he kept for you while you slept safe. No yelling, no threats. Just facts laid bare." He stepped aside then. "Your turn." Hank wordlessly brought out brushes and rags he'd kept in the shed. When father took them, passed them to the boys. They bent down awkwardly, scrubbing faint ghosts of paint Cole had already nearly erased. It was mostly symbolic now, but symbols matter. They wiped, rinsed with buckets Hank filled from the pump, and replaced small flags under Cole's quiet watch. No one took pictures. No one posted. The only sounds were brush against stone and the boys' uneven breathing. When they finished, Cole nodded once. "Better." The parents murmured thanks and apologies, but Cole only said, "Teach them who's here," before turning away. The lesson was not complete, but it had begun. In the failing light, the teenagers stood a moment longer before Reeves's grave, seeing perhaps for the first time the weight of a name carved in granite. Evening slid down fast once the sun touched the ridge. The last orange light bled across the rows of stones and turned the frost to faint fire before fading to blue-gray. The parents stayed back near the fence now, silent sentries, while their sons faced the weight of what they had done. Cole didn't pace or loom. He stood off to one side, arms loose at his jacket seams, letting the cold do part of the work. Shame doesn't need volume. It grows in quiet. Evan, who had led the night before, finally broke first. "We didn't think," he said, voice cracking. "It was just stupid." The words felt too small for what they'd done. Lucas shifted, then added, "We didn't know who he was." Ryan looked like he might speak, but swallowed it and stared at the ground. Only Milo met Cole's gaze, frightened but wanting something to hold on to. Cole didn't step closer. He spoke the way an NCO does when he wants truth to land and stay. Calm, low, certain. "You know now. And it isn't just Reeves. Look around." He turned slightly, gesturing to the silent ranks of stones stretching into darkness. "Each one a life. Somebody's brother, father, son. Some came home and built the town you walk every day. Some didn't." The boy's eyes flickered across the nearest names, unfamiliar but suddenly not abstract. Cole let the quiet expand again. It was the kind of silence that had weight. You could feel it press on your chest. "War isn't a movie," he continued finally, "and memory's fragile. People like me spend a long time making sure names don't disappear. A can of paint can take it away in seconds." His voice didn't rise, but it grew firmer. "You owe this ground respect. It's older and braver than you know." The parents behind them stayed still, eyes shining with a mix of gratitude and discomfort. They had wanted their children corrected, but not humiliated. And this was exactly that balance. Not a public spectacle, just truth told plain. Cole looked to Hank, who had been quiet until now, leaning on his wheelbarrow. The old caretaker cleared his throat. "I've walked these rows near every day for 40 years. Knew some of these men when they were boys. Put flowers on their stones for wives who couldn't come themselves. You think this place doesn't feel alive, but it is. It's full of stories. Don't treat stories like trash." He reached into his coat and handed each boy a small cloth flag. "Plant these before you go." They moved slowly, each kneeling to press the little wooden dowels deep into the winter soil by a few random graves. Not just Reeves's. The act steadied them. By the end, their hands were red from cold and damp, but the lines of flags looked stronger, less broken. Cole finally spoke once more, not angry, almost quiet. "What you did can't be erased. But what you do next matters. Respect isn't talk. It's work. Start there." He didn't offer forgiveness. He didn't have to. The boys nodded, some quick, some barely. Parents gathered them close then, hands on shoulders, brief murmured thanks to Hank and to Cole. One father reached out as if to shake Cole's hand. Cole gave a short, firm grip and let go. As they turned to leave, headlights cut across the stones, throwing long shadows. The cemetery was emptying again, but the feeling had changed. It wasn't violation now. It was discipline, lesson, the first fragile piece of restoration. Cole lingered after the vehicles rolled away. He looked once more at Reeves's grave under its clean flag, then at the line of new small flags marking other names. The cold stung his cheeks, but inside something eased. Not finished, never finished, but begun. He pulled his cap down, gave the rouse a final nod, and stepped back into the night. The night after the confrontation fell without drama. No sirens, no town hall speeches. Just darkness and cold settling over the cemetery again, the way it always had. But under that quiet, something new took root, a current of accountability that didn't need shouting to exist. Early the next morning, Hank arrived first as usual. He half expected to find things as they'd been before Cole's cleaning. Vandalism often invites more, but the rows were untouched, the marble still clean, the new flags sharp against the pale sky. A scrap of paper stuck under a stone caught his eye. A folded note weighed down by a small rock. He bent and read just 2 words in blocky teenage handwriting. "We're sorry, no names." Hank smiled faintly despite himself and tucked the note into his coat. By mid-morning, quiet work began without announcement. The 4 boys returned, this time with fathers but no mothers, no prompting from the sheriff. They didn't come to pose or explain. They came with tools, rakes, garbage bags, paintbrushes, sandpaper. They slipped through the gate and started moving along the fence line, clearing winter debris, repainting the posts they'd scraped climbing over. Cole wasn't there to watch. Hank was, leaning on his wheelbarrow at a distance, saying nothing. He just nodded once when Evan glanced his way and then left them to it. Across town, word spread anyway. Photos weren't taken, but eyes saw. A passing mail carrier, a trucker slowing to wave, an older couple walking their dog. Texts flew. They're back at the cemetery cleaning. No one went to gawk. The community, perhaps unconsciously, let the boys work without spectators. That was its own mercy and its own quiet discipline. By noon, the cemetery looked tended in a way it hadn't for years. Fences scraped and repainted, litter gone, wreaths upright. The teenagers moved slower than they had the night of destruction. Not lazy, but careful. They didn't speak much beyond small instructions. Here, hold this, more paint. They were learning a different vocabulary, labor as apology. Hank finally approached when he saw them wrestling with a bent section of wire fence. "Pull the post straight, not the mesh," he advised. They listened, grateful for instruction but receiving no praise. He handed them gloves and walked on. Meanwhile, the sheriff's quiet investigation ticked on in the background. Delaney called Hank to confirm what he saw, asked for the note, said charges could be pressed but wouldn't be if restitution continued. "Sometimes," Delaney said, "lessons better than record." Hank agreed. He knew what true contrition looked like. This was close. Later that afternoon, Cole returned briefly, meaning only to check the stones before night froze everything again. He stopped when he saw the boys working still, hands raw, jackets spattered with white fence paint. They froze at his appearance but didn't bolt. Cole just watched for a moment, then gave the smallest of nods and turned away. No speech, no pat on the back, just recognition. That alone seemed to straighten their spines. By dusk, the work was done. The boys and their fathers loaded tools quietly and left without a word to anyone. Behind them, the cemetery stood whole, even a little improved. Fresh paint, cleaner paths, small flags where before there had been none. Hank closed the gate as the last truck taillights vanished. He paused, looking out over the rows now bathed in the last red light of day. He thought of Cole's silent salute, of the town gathering, of the boys bent in cold apology. It felt like the kind of accountability small places still know how to make. Not viral, not performative, but human and hard-earned. Somewhere, a single crow called and then was silent. The caretaker smiled and turned for home, boots crunching steady on the frozen path, knowing the ground had been defended twice now, once by the man beneath the stone, and again by those learning late but honestly how to respect what sacrifice means. The next day dawned clear and bright, brittle cold, with a hard sun that turned every frost crystal to glass. Word had moved through the town as quietly as it had the day before, but this time there was no outrage to propel it, only a steady hum of reflection. Something had happened out at the cemetery that people understood without needing press releases or meetings. The story, Marine restores desecrated graves, kids return to repair, had spread house to house in whispers that carried more weight than any headline. By mid-morning, small signs of change surfaced. At the Depot Cafe, the usual talk of weather and road conditions bent naturally toward memory. Ed Walker, the old Korean war vet, retold the part about Cole arriving alone. Didn't wait for orders, just fixed it. Across the counter, younger men listened without the usual half-smile. This wasn't nostalgia but instruction. At another table, the elementary teacher who had left the Paper Star spoke quietly with the librarian about organizing a history display. Photos of town veterans, letters from the front, names with faces for children to see. At the hardware store, the owner set a small sign by the register. Free flags for veterans' graves. Take what you need. By noon, the box was half empty, people picking one or two on their way to lunch. Nobody asked permission. They just did it. Sheriff Delaney stopped by the diner and over coffee told a couple of old-timers that the boys were helping with more repairs that weekend. "They know," was all he said. That was enough. The men nodded. No thirst for punishment, just relief that something right was happening. Cole's name came up often, but never in the tone of gossip. People spoke of him with a new respect, but kept it spare. Marine took care of it, they'd say, and that was the story's spine. Not hero worship, just acknowledgement. Cole himself stayed quiet. He did not post or call attention. He took his long walk the next morning, as always, cap down, boots slow. But each nod he received felt a little heavier, a little more deliberate. At the high school, the principal used morning announcements to speak, voice steady but without accusation. Respect is not optional. What we care for shows who we are. He asked homerooms to discuss local history that day, who had served, who was buried in that field just beyond town. In one classroom, a boy who hadn't spoken much before told his peers about his grandfather's grave there. Another admitted quietly that he'd been part of the vandalism but was making it right. No one jeered. The room stayed silent in a way that said, lesson learned. That afternoon, 2 women from the VFW auxiliary came by the cemetery with armfuls of wreaths and candles. They didn't announce themselves. They simply added color and light to rows that had felt abandoned. Hank met them at the gate and helped carry boxes. He didn't ask why. He knew. As dusk fell, lanterns flickered in a few windows facing the hill. Families who'd hardly thought of the cemetery before now spoke of maybe visiting come spring, cleaning markers, teaching kids the names. Not because of social pressure, but because memory had been jarred awake. Cole sat on his porch that night with coffee gone cold and watched the breath of his dog curl in the dark. He hadn't asked for any of this. He'd only wanted to put one wrong right. Yet the quiet ripple now moving through town felt good. Something mended not just on stone, but inside people. He thought of Reeves's mother, who hadn't called but had posted one simple line online. "Thank you for honoring my son." No tagging, no photo, just that. Down in the valley, Main Street lights glimmered like a string of watchfires. The town, small and sometimes forgetful, had been reminded. It felt, for the first time in a long time, awake to its own debt. And Cole, sipping the last of his bitter coffee, felt the rare peace of a mission complete. Not dramatic, not finished forever, but enough for tonight. Late winter dusk carried a softer light, and the wind that had cut so sharp days before felt easier against the face. Cole parked the green pickup outside the cemetery gate and sat for a long moment before stepping out. No crate this time, no brushes or solvent, only a single folded flag and a thermos of coffee. He had come back alone. The path he followed was familiar now. Frost rimmed the grass, but the fence posts gleamed with fresh paint where young hands had worked. Small flags lined many graves, bright even in dim light. Someone, maybe the VFW women, maybe the teenagers, had left evergreen wreaths on stones he'd never seen decorated before. Each quiet offering had turned the place from field to cared-for ground. When he reached Reeves's grave, he stopped and let the cold air still him. The marble was clean, white and hard against the grey sky. The child's drawing remained taped, edges reinforced by someone else's care. A tiny marine, still smiling, the marker strokes bold and simple. New tokens surrounded the base. 2 coins stacked carefully, a laminated prayer card, a winter bouquet with deep red carnations that still looked alive. He knelt and brushed a bit of dried grass away from the dates, a gesture more habit than need. For a while, Cole just sat on his heels, coffee steaming between his hands. He thought of patrols, of other names carved in distant stone, of the line between those who return and those who do not. Reeves had been young, yes, but not faceless now, not after these last days. His story had been pulled back into the living, into classrooms and kitchen tables and shop counters. That mattered. The cemetery was empty except for a pair of crows shifting in the cedar, but footsteps sounded soon on the gravel behind him. Cole looked up and saw Hank coming, slow but steady, wheelbarrow empty. He carried no tools, just the easy gait of a man checking his ground. "Evenin'," Hank said quietly when he reached him. "Evenin'," Cole replied. They stood together without ceremony. Hank nodded at the stone. "Looks good." Cole took a sip of coffee, handed the thermos over without asking. Hank drank, winced at the bitterness, and handed it back. "Kids came back again yesterday," he said. "Cleaned the other side of the fence line. No one told them to." Cole's mouth lifted just slightly. "Good." Hank scratched his chin, eyes on the flag, snapping once in a stray gust. "Town'll remember this for a while?" "Hope so," Cole said. Silence returned, comfortable this time. The sort of silence between men who don't need to fill it. After a few minutes, Hank said, "Mrs. Reeves came by this morning. Left that bouquet?" He pointed at the carnations. "Didn't want to fuss. Just wanted to see it clean." Cole lowered his gaze to the flowers, throat tightening against an unexpected swell of feeling. He nodded once, slow. "Good." They stayed until the sky drained from silver to deep blue, and the first stars pricked through. The crows lifted and went somewhere darker. Hank eventually tipped his cap, murmured, "See you tomorrow," and headed back toward his truck. Cole remained a little longer. He stood finally, knees stiff, and placed the folded flag he'd brought at the base of Reeves' stone, not as replacement but as another quiet token. Then he raised a brief, sharp salute once more. No one saw but the stones and the early stars. That was enough. When he left, headlights swept across the neat rows, glinting off new flags and wreaths. The cemetery looked less like a place of loss than it had before the vandalism, more alive, paradoxically, because people had come and remembered. Driving home, Cole felt no triumph, only a grounded peace. One man's small act had opened space for many hands. The dead had been honored, the living instructed. And on this winter night, the town carried that lesson forward in quiet hearts. Hank arrived the next morning before sunrise, as he always did. The frost was light and dry, crunching under his boots in small, brittle sounds. His wheelbarrow carried little today, just a broom, a rag, and his old leather-bound ledger. He'd kept the book since the first day the town had given him keys to the gate. It began as simple records, dates of burial, headstones ordered, flags replaced. Over the decades it had grown into something else, part maintenance log, and part quiet chronicle of what happened here when no one was looking. He paused at Reeves's grave and tipped his cap, letting the cold bite his ears. The marble was still clean, the carnation still standing from Mrs. Reeves. The folded flag Cole had left the night before looked sharp against the pale base. Hank set the wheelbarrow down and knelt, opening the ledger on one knee. He wrote slowly, block letters neat though his hands were stiff. December. Damage repaired. Witnessed honor. Then, as he had done for unusual events over the years, he listed names, not in full, just enough to mark their presence. Harris, USMC, Everett Walker Calhoun, schoolteacher, jogger, unknown boy. He paused, tapping the pen, then added simply, youths returned. Fences mended, flags set. He didn't name them. There was no need. The ledger was for truth, not shame. After he closed the book, Hank sat back on his heels and looked out over the rows. He could remember so many mornings alone here, work done without anyone knowing. Today felt different. The field had witnesses now. Not in a loud, parading way, but in a network of quiet eyes and hearts that had come and seen. A car passed on the road. A hand rose briefly in greeting. Hank recognized the teacher's scarf in the passenger seat. She slowed, looked in, but didn't stop. A subtle check-in, enough to say, "We're watching too." At mid-morning, the jogger returned, this time walking and carrying a small bundle of flags. He caught Hank's glance, gave a nod, and began planting them along the back row where markers had gone bare. No speech, no asking permission. Just work. Even the teenagers came back, 2 of them, Lucas and Milo. No parents this time. They parked at the far end and walked in, shoulders hunched but determined. They carried nothing but gloved hands and trash bags. Hank didn't speak first. He let them pick up wind-blown debris, write a wreath, brush leaves from an older Korean war grave. When they finally approached, Lucas said softly, "We wanted to. Help more." Hank simply nodded toward a pile of old flags that needed retiring. "Fold 'em proper," he said. They did. As noonlight grew warmer, Hank found himself smiling more than usual. The cemetery felt tended, and not just by him. He touched the ledger once in his coat pocket, a talisman heavier than paper. So many small acts had been added these last days that would never make news, but would shape memory. Cole appeared near midday, walking instead of driving. He stopped when he saw the boys working but didn't interrupt. He went straight to Reeves's grave, crouched, checked the stone with careful fingers, and gave a satisfied nod. Hank lifted a hand in greeting. Cole returned it and turned to go. No conversation needed. Before leaving, Hank opened the ledger again and added one last line under the date. Community awake. Memory held. Then he closed it with a quiet snap and slid it back into his coat. As dusk slid in, lanterns blinked on at a few graves, candles left by unseen hands. Hank finished sweeping the path to the gate. The day felt heavier and lighter all at once, heavier with what had been learned, lighter with what had been restored. In the ledger and in the town, witness now existed where indifference had been. And Hank knew that mattered as much as any sheriff's report or polished speech. He closed the gate and locked it with a steady hand. The keys jingled once, a small, clear sound in the cold. Behind him, the cemetery rested, guarded not just by fences, but by memory reawakened, names alive again because neighbors, young and old, had chosen to show up, to work, and to record. Snow fell lightly the next weekend, soft and dry, laying a thin white veil across the cemetery's trimmed paths and upright flags. The storm was gentle, nothing like the hard freeze of the week before, and it seemed almost ceremonial, an erasing coat after so much turmoil. Cole walked his loop later than usual that morning. His breath plumed in the cold as he passed the outer fence. The world had gone back to its rhythm, but the place beyond the iron bars was no longer anonymous. It felt watched, guarded. He paused by the gate and looked in. New wreaths dotted rows that had been empty for years. Little sticks of color, flags from the hardware store box, stood straight in fresh drifts. Tracks showed where someone had come to clear snow from a few headstones before him. Maybe Hank, maybe one of the teenagers. Quiet stewardship had taken hold. Inside town, the echoes lingered in subtle ways. The school history display the librarian and teacher planned had gone up already. Photographs of local service members, a large map with pins for each conflict. Students passed slower in the hallway where it hung. Even in the cafe, talk of football and weather now sometimes paused to remember what Cole did or what those boys are learning. Not gossip, more like a touchstone. Cole finally stepped through the gate. The snow muffled his boots, and the whole place felt like a cathedral, white and still. He went straight to Reeves's grave. The marble was frosted but clean. The carnations, brown now but upright, clung stubbornly. The folded flag he had left was half buried, but dry. He brushed snow gently from the name and the little child's drawing, edges sealed tight with new tape. Someone, perhaps the teacher, had laminated a fresh copy. The colors hadn't run. He stood there a long while, hands deep in pockets, hat low. He didn't feel the same heat of anger that had driven him that first morning. What rose instead was a steady calm, gratitude mixed with sorrow. Reeves had not come home to see any of this, but his memory had rallied the town. One man's service, one boy's careless act, one Marine's quiet repair. The thread of events had pulled people back toward remembering. A sound behind him broke the quiet, soft footsteps. He turned to see two of the boys again, Milo and Evan this time, hats pulled low, faces pale from cold but not fear. They didn't flinch under his gaze. "We just came to check," Evan said awkwardly. "Make sure it's still clean." Cole studied them a long moment, then nodded once. "Good." Milo scuffed the snow with his boot. "We want to help. Keep it nice. If that's okay." Cole's voice was quiet but firm. "It's more than okay." The boys relaxed, only slightly. They didn't stay long, just brushed off a couple of nearby stones and reset a flag that had leaned. Before they left, Evan looked back once and said, "Sorry." "Again." Cole gave the smallest of nods. No sermon, no absolution, just a Marine's acknowledgement that contrition, like respect, is proven over time. After they disappeared down the lane, Cole turned once more to Reeves's grave. The snow was falling heavier now, blanketing footsteps. He touched the top edge of the stone briefly with one gloved hand, then turned toward the gate. By the time he reached the road, the cemetery behind him had vanished under the soft storm, but he knew it was different now, not because damage can be undone, but because memory had been defended. Quiet hands had done their work. Witness had been written down. Young men had begun to understand the cost behind carved names. Cole walked home through whitening fields, the town ahead lit warm against the grey. He felt no need to speak about what had happened. The place itself would speak to anyone who came after. And somewhere deep inside, the Marine in him, the one who had acted first, then thought, finally stood at ease.